Test, test, 1, 2, 3.
What's that? Modifying glasses, huh? Yeah. Perfect. Okay, I will call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. This is the regular meeting for Tuesday, April 6, 2021. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Tim Hale.
Here.
Stephanie Nowers. Here. George McKee. Robert Yunt.
Here.
Moki Tu.
Here.
Jesse Sumner.
Here.
Tam Bovee. Here. Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Let's take a look at the agenda. Is there any objection, first of all, to adding a proclamation for NSTAR after the Pledge of Allegiance? It's a short proclamation. Safe digging. Seeing none, we'll do that. Anything Some members want to pull from the consent agenda. Okay, that's good. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as presented. Mr. Harris, why don't you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harris. Now I'll read the proclamation that was presented to us from NSTAR. It's a mayoral proclamation. Whereas each year, Alaska's underground utility infrastructure is jeopardized by unintentional damage. And whereas the phone number 811 was designated as National Call Before You Dig number in 2005 and is an active, free service throughout Alaska that dispatches utilities to locate lines at the subject property. And whereas placing a call to 811 at least 2 business days before digging, respecting the marked lines and digging with care gently reduces the risk of hitting a utility line before you dig. And whereas the rate at which Alaskans hit utility lines is 3 times greater than national average, boy, that's pretty good, isn't it? And thus local and statewide efforts are necessary to increase awareness of 811, safe digging, preventing damage to underground utility infrastructure, and ensuring public safety. Now therefore, I, Vern Halter, Matsu Borough Mayor, do hereby proclaim and pronounce April 2021 as Safe Digging Month in the Matsu Borough and urge all citizens to spread awareness about safe digging practices and always call 811 2 business days before you dig. In the witness where I've set my hand and seal this 6th day of April 2021. And so that's a very good proclamation. We should pay attention to it because every spring it's the snow goes and the geese and the sandhill cranes return and everybody starts digging. So call 811, please. Okay, any changes to the minutes of the preceding meetings? Hearing none, no minutes are approved as presented. Cities, reports from cities. Madam Mayor from Wasilla, please.
Madam Mayor, if I can get you to turn the mic on, just press that button. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Halter, Manager Brown, and Assembly. I'm Glenda Ledford, Mayor for the City of Wasilla. The week of April 24th, you can safely dispose of unused or expired medication at either location of the Fred Myers or Sunshine Community Health Center in Talkeetna. What's happening at the Menard? The Ponytail Girls Hockey Tournament is April 8th through the 11th. The Matsu Home Builders Spring Home Show is April 24th and 25th. The City of Wasilla respectfully asks for the Assembly to continue funding the planning grant. That grant is dispersed as follows. Youth Court, $25,000, SARTS, $50,000, DEA Drug Officers, $75,000, and $75,000 passed through to the City of Palmer. Last but not least, I'm proud to introduce my new Deputy Administrator, Crystal Nygaard. Crystal, would you stand, please? She comes from the private sector, and she will be in charge of economic development for the City of Wasilla. Does anyone have any questions?
Anything for the mayor? Oh, thank you very much.
Thank
for
you.
coming. Appreciate it. Palmer with Houston. I don't see anybody here from those 2 cities, so let's go to the school district. Nobody from the school district, but I do want to thank the school district and the school board who recently appropriated enough money to finish the Houston school project so we could get it out to bid. I think Mr. Brown and their staff had that, once that was made by the school district, had the bid ready the next day, I believe was the status. So we appreciate the school district and school board and thank them. And let's go, Mr. Smolden, State of Alaska.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Manager Brown, members of the Assembly. Not a whole lot to report tonight. The governor did appoint commissioner for Department of Public Safety. James Cockrell has a lot of experience in both the troopers as well as the wildlife troopers. Lots of good things to say about him, including Senator Begich also put out a press release today complimenting Mr. Cockrell. So we anticipate that he'll be able to be approved by the legislature fairly quickly. You know, the governor made public safety a number one concern for him, and we have made some really good progress in that department, in that area. Not sure how many of you are aware of this, but before the governor's administration, we had a serious backlog of sexual assault kits. And I know part of your funding of SARTs and things like that is related to that, but we're actually looking at having all those caught up by this fall. So we're anticipating there won't be any more backlogs of those. Just a number of really good things have happened in public safety, and Mr. Cockrell is excited to continue in that direction. So the other issue that probably has come up since last I spoke to you was regarding the governor's announcement about submerged lands in navigatable waters in Alaska. The governor has made a really strong statement to the federal government about our right to manage those waters. There is legal precedent, and I don't want to get too much into legal things because there's Mr. Spiropoulos is sitting here, but clearly two unanimous decisions by the United States Supreme Court on navigatable waters issues with John Sturgeon is a clear indication that the state of Alaska has the right to manage those waters. And the governor has let President Biden and his administration know that we are fully intend to continue to do that. So as that affects the Mat-Su, DNR is putting together a more comprehensive map of what we believe are navigatable waters. So that's something you can look at in the future as that continues to be developed. Not too much more to report. I think Mr. Harris will probably talk a little bit about CARES Act money and what the legislature is doing with that. But for the most part, the state government is kind of waiting on some questions to be answered about the new CARES Act funding. So, and that's coming slowly from the federal government. But I think that's all for me, unless anybody has any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Smolden? Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Always taking the time to come here. We appreciate that. Now I've got a report from the library board.
Good evening. I'm Diane Hall-Rambo. I'm the chairperson of the Borough Library Board. We would like to thank you all for your past support of our borough libraries. During the past year, the library, with all the challenges it presented, the libraries were able to continue to provide services to the patrons and their communities. With your support, they were able to provide high-speed internet access. From parking lots, they were able to provide the story time hours, the STEAM programs for the teens and tweens, and programs for adults. They're among the first in the borough to offer curbside services, and they continue to offer those curbside services to those who request them. As the author Sidney Sheldon wrote, libraries store the energy that fuels the imagination. They open up windows to the world and inspire us to explore and achieve and contribute to improving our quality of life. Libraries change lives for the better. As the communities work to open and come back to life and open after the pandemic, our libraries will lead the way. They're the face of government in each of our communities and play a vital role in providing accurate information. They provide forms, they provide job search information, they provide computers for people that don't have access. And also the forms for heating assistance. The librarians and the staff are busy providing services, and we would ask for your continued support of our libraries. I want to thank Nancy Bertels, Carol Goltz, and Ann Yaden for their assistance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any questions?
Questions for the libraries? Ms. Nowers?
Not a question, but through the mayor, I just wanted to thank the libraries for, I have 2 bookworms at home, and the fact that you were able to keep the libraries going with the curbside pickup was a wonderful thing for them to continue to be able to get their books that they use for school and their 10, youth adult fiction books that they come home with at any one time. So I love libraries and appreciate all the work you did to keep going through a tough time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Joint Assembly School Board on school issues. I don't believe we have a report on that. We're going to try to activate that though, and have those folks meet on a regular basis. Public relation reports. Any other public relation reports that some of them wants to report, or staff? Okay, Mr. Brown, it's up to you. For you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief tonight. Brenda, could you bring that slide up? Awesome, thank you. I'm good, sir, thank you. I just wanted to take a minute as the clerk's bringing up a photo tonight, just talking about our borough staff and our community CERT teams and just community members in general that have been supporting various points of distribution for the vaccine distribution. So this is a picture from Raven Hall from one of the recent pods at the fairgrounds. So I just want to take a moment and just say thank you to those folks. You can see they support the logistics for that event. And it's been really helpful in just making sure that when we have those pods, that they're done well, that they're effective, that they flow well, people can get in and out. So that doesn't become an impediment to getting the vaccine. So I just wanted to say that's a great illustration of service to our community, and we appreciate all that they're doing. On a note for the assembly and for the public, we did, as the mayor mentioned, Houston School rebuild. That project's out to bid. So that'll advertise for about the next month, roughly. And the assembly should expect that to come. Right now, we're templating that for the first meeting in June for contract approval with questions and addenda. If there's a number of those, it could potentially be delayed to the second meeting in June. But that's generally when you would expect or should expect to see action to be taken on that project at the assembly level. And then lastly, I had another topic we were contacted by Representative McCabe's office. He serves on the House Transportation Committee around proposed legislation to allow snow machine or all-purpose vehicles on roads with maximum speeds of 45 miles per hour or less. The borough has not taken a position on that in the past because there was no legislation out there when the assembly adopted its legislative priorities. So the borough staff are formulating a response and may testify at the House Transportation Committee meeting this Thursday. So I just wanted to mention that on record to the assembly members so there's no surprises. If you have any comments or thoughts on that you want to share, you could share that later during the meeting under assembly comments if you have any thoughts or direction you would like to provide me. And then lastly, I would like to invite up John Harris and Bill Stoltz just for a short legislative session update. And that'll provide the assembly an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have of them.
I don't touch that, I guess. Thank you very much. I have a strong enough voice. I think it'll go through the microphone from here. Bill's going to take most of it, but I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the budget process. The Senate is actually, took the lead because they started off before the House did, and the House took about 30 days to organize. So they were slightly behind as far as the process goes. And typically the process is that the House will pass the operating budget over to the Senate. The Senate will delay a little bit, but then ultimately pass the capital budget over to the House. Well, the capital budget is far from being worked on really, because they're trying to figure out how much of this COVID money is coming in. Quite frankly, I don't know that they're going to be able to figure out how it can be dispersed until after the session is over because of the dates that they're allowed to do that. So Many members are talking special session, whether they can get the votes to call special session and whether the governor will allow them to have a special session, I don't know. If you remember last year, it was done through the LBNA process, which didn't make a lot of legislators happy because it was a fairly small group of legislators making the decisions on where this money was going to be spent, along with the governor's suggestion. So, yeah, that's the one thing legislators typically hold pretty sacrosanct, is the ability to disperse money, because under the Constitution, they're the authority of passing out money. They're the ones that keep control of the purse strings, so to speak. So we'll see where that goes. That's a little early yet, but Bill's going to talk about a couple of other pieces of legislation out there. The one thing that I think you need to realize is that the GO bond bill, which a lot of people are talking about, had a number of items in there that would be for the Mat-Su Borough region, have already been stripped out in various different committees. And so we have to, some of them actually came from committees that some of the members representing the Mat-Su region sit on. So including monies for the Houston school and some other transportation and other things like that. So we have to try to figure how we're going to make that get back in or get paid in another way. So anyway, I'll be open for questions, but I'll let Bill take it from there on a couple of 3 pieces of legislation and other issues.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Assembly. Bill Stoltz. Just 3 quick issues. Just a quick update on reapportionment, Board of Fish, and the alcohol bill, Senate Bill 9. Redistricting, when I talked to you previously, we were looking at a September 30th date for what they call the legacy format data for the census information was to come on September 30th. They've now revised that date to the 3rd week in August. Now, it's progress. We're not going backwards anyway, but it's still going to put a lot of challenges for all the involved parties and the board to get everything done. But they're guided by the constitutional deadline, and it's how. But as changes come up, I'll let you know on those. This weekend, on Saturday, April 10th at 1 o'clock, the House Fisheries Committee, or I guess it's called the House, more appropriately, the House Commercial Fisheries Committee, is going to have a hearing on appointments. We got a little precursor on that when Peter Machicki, when he was resource chair in the last legislature, held a late, I think, an October meeting on there, and we saw some of the activity from the stakeholders and on the peninsula and other areas, and Kodiak. They played their hand. There's John. There were going to be challenges to John Wood on several fronts, and I think one of the biggest problems they have with John is he's an effective, knowledgeable member, and you don't want a savvy, sharp Louisiana lawyer sitting on there. And John has been effective both when he worked for then Senator Dunleavy on fisheries issues, and I had the privilege of working with him. So they're going to come after him on a number of fronts, and one of the attacks has been there's too many people from South Central on the board, and they got pretty nasty there. They said John was from Anchorage. So he was at one time, but he's repented for those sins.
That's pretty low. That's pretty low.
But and lastly, the alcohol bill, I've been following it and having lots of conversations. Senator Machicki is pushing hard on this, and Senator Reinbold has announced she's talked to her staff. She wants to have amendments and move the bill out of committee. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a committee that's allowed any Mat-Su testimony to point, whether it's been the Labor and Commerce Committee or that. And I've reminded the staff that it's only been the invited stakeholders that Senator Machicki has been brought in. Mayor Ledford and our chambers and our business community has not been at the table, and they suggested, well, send in emails. No, it's I'd expect a little better treatment there. We've got 2 Valley members on that committee, and Mr. Myers from the new member from the North Pole region, and Jesse Keel from Juneau has been very sympathetic and has to the issue of the population issue, and actually took to task a lot of the social service type providers who question, we're throwing out population as one of the key controls for stopping all the ills of limit by population. And of all, that was a very pleasant surprise to have Senator Keel questioning the anecdotal information they were putting forward. And very interesting, their answer was they started quoting the World Health Organization, CDC, and other groups anecdotally, and I don't think that played very well with Senator Shower as but anyway, so it's if we just get a fair process, this is the only place in the whole legislative process where I think the Mat-Su has a fair shake. It's been very uncomfortable. I've even been groveling a little bit, trying to get them to slow it down and make sure the Mat-Su is taken care of. Well, it's going to take our legislators to be assertive, and I think Senator Reinbold should be sympathetic by nature, but I don't know what it's having this detachment and isolation has been really tough on some of these issues where you need the personal contact, but we're doing the best we can. But if we don't get this done in this committee, it doesn't look very good. So I'm gonna be on the phone again early tomorrow morning, but those are the issues we're dealing with. But I think I said they're looking at a marathon session in that Saturday meeting. If anybody has time to call in, or through your social media and other contacts, let them know that there's going to be an attack on some of the members that have been very positive in their actions in the last cycle in Cook Inlet and supporting the corridors and others. So now it's payback time for some folks to go after some of the appointees. Now it's time for we need to defend those folks, and you can participate, send emails, and I will be talking to Josh Revak, who chairs the Senate Resources Committee. He's a pretty good friend of mine, and hopefully we'll have a more fair hearing in the Senate Resources Committee. But a lot of challenges this year, and we're doing our best.
Questions for the lobbyist, Mr. Harris, Mr. Stoltz? What do you think about how we should respond to the ATVs and snow machines driving on roads up to 45? That's a kind of a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's well, boy, that's why when you're blessed as a policymaker, I'm just a hired hand. And that's a policy issue.
Okay, good job.
Mr. Mayor, I think at best, it should be a local option. It should be up to individual communities that regulate that, to make that decision.
That's a good idea.
I don't think that Anchorage is going to say they're going to let snow machines drive down the Seward Highway or C Street or other things like that, even though I think the speed limit on some of those streets isn't much more than that, so probably not the Seward Highway, but C Street and some of those others is not real fast. So.
Okay. Just as information, my younger brother, who has had some problems with his driving, and he had a snow machine, he got his COVID testing done driving up on a snow machine. He had a lot of pictures taken of him. They said that was the only snow machine they had to pull up and wait in line for a couple hours. So the valley is a little different.
Yeah. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Okay. How are you doing, Mr. Brown? Anything else? Okay. Mr. Spropoulos, your report, please.
Your mic, Mr. Spropoulos, please.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Keeping with the past few meetings here, I guess since about February, I'm going to talk a little more about the Alaska Constitution. So these are the sections that we've kind of gone through already, right? Last time we talked about home rule powers. And so the system of local government in Alaska was set up by the Constitution, and the Constitution actually contains the local boundary commission. It's something that we hear about from time to time. It's the state agency that deals with not only incorporation, but amending borough lines or municipal lines. It's in the executive branch. It's actually created by the Constitution. And so what's interesting about it is by constitution, the local boundary commission considers boundary changes, and I'll get onto this in a little bit, but it's a little more limited by the constitution than what the statutes actually grant to it, because boundary changes do not include incorporation. Boundary change would be adding or subtracting from your local government. So when you think about the framework of the Constitution where you would have organized and unorganized boroughs, this would certainly come into play where you had an unorganized borough potentially, or an organized borough potentially taking up more and more land or expanding or changing. The other thing that's interesting about the local boundary commission is it can present proposed changes during the first 10 days of any regular session as to a change in a local boundary of a municipality. And if the local boundary commission decides, look, this boundary should be changed, it becomes effective 45 days after presentation or at the end of the session if they adjourned early, but I don't know that they've ever done that. Unless disapproved by a resolution by the majority of the members of each house. So it's not joint session, which is also a very unique thing under our Constitution. A lot of the other things that you see in the Constitution, like the biggest one being the gubernatorial override, is where the houses are sitting in joint session, confirmation of government, gubernatorial appointees as well. But here it's each house. And then it goes on to say the board may establish procedures whereby boundaries may be adjusted by local action. And this is what then we talk about at the local level. So these are the statutes, it's a little bit away from the Constitution, but these are the statutes that then talk about how to change annexation and detachment. So annexation is, of course, adding on. Detachment is taking off an area into your municipality. And the local option speaks to voting, right? Either voting questions in the annexing municipality and voters in the current municipality, or if it's only municipal. And so in this state law, you have provisions, various provisions within the local boundary commission for all of these. Incorporation, change of name, annexation and detachment, that would be the boundary changes provided for in the Constitution. Merger, which is the joining of two. Consolidation, which is what you have in Anchorage and Juneau and Sitka, where you have a unified municipality that they're all consolidated into one government. Unification and dissolution, which is getting rid of the government, local government, which is actually very hard to do under the statutes. So that section, that's Article 12 of the Constitution, talks about the boundaries in the local boundary commission. Article 13, as you can see, as you move on through the Constitution, we get kind of into these more boring subjects, don't tend to apply as much. But this one actually does. It relates way back to the beginning. And this is agreement for the joint administration of powers. And we see this a lot, particularly recently with road projects, when we talk about talking with DOT and they build a road and then we agree to maintain it. Felton Street was one that the Assembly recently approved where the state's actually going to give the borough the money. The borough's going to construct the road, and then when the borough's done constructing the road, City of Palmer is going to take it and maintain it. And that all comes from this in the Constitution, which allows various local governments to enter into agreements to exercise joint functions and powers. And then when we talk about the borough obtaining new powers in state law, we usually talk about either a grant from the legislature or approval by the voters. Well, the Constitution contains the third way that the borough could get another power, and that is transferred from a city. And so the city could, if they wanted to, transfer powers to the borough and may likewise revoke those powers. It doesn't happen often. There aren't any in the Mat-Su borough that I'm aware of that the borough has powers because the cities have transferred them to us. In our borough code, we have transferred some of our powers to the cities, that is planning and land use and parks and recreation power. But there was an issue that came up within the past year where we saw that up in Fairbanks, they had transferred some powers to the Fairbanks North Star Borough. But this gets back to Section 1 of the Constitution, because you want a minimum of local self-government, or a maximum local self-government with a minimum of units and to prevent duplication. And so by sharing powers and or transferring powers, you actually then start to execute what's way back in section 1. And so this is seen as another article to expand section 1, which gets back to maximum local control with minimum local governments, and you don't have this overlaying patchwork of governmental agencies. So that's it for tonight, 12 and 13. The next two are really boring. We'll cover those next time. And the only other thing I have tonight, Mr. Mayor, is that in the agenda, in introductions, it's actually the last introduction for the night. It's ordinance 21039. I want to point that out to the assembly. It is an ordinance that terminates NPI's leases out at the port. It is an ordinance by agreement. The agreement is in the informational memorandum. It has already been signed by NPI. The term sheet that kind of outlines the agreement is in the packet, as well as the IM that kind of explains some of the highlights. But it is all there. It's up for introduction tonight, so no public hearing, but if you have, it'll be up for public hearing next meeting.
Speaking about boundaries, and isn't there a classic case in the borough where there's a motion to detach from the Matsu Borough?
There was, it didn't move beyond the local boundary commission, but way before anybody's time here, serving in local government, some of us were living out here, out in the eastern boundary of the borough, there was a petition to detach from the borough and not be part of the Matanuska-Susitna borough. And part of the problem that they faced was one of the standards for detachment is you have to show how you're going to provide the services that are currently being provided by the borough. And the argument a lot of people make in regions such as that is, well, we don't get any services. Well, one of the big services you get is education. And it would cost a lot to set up a whole new school district, build whole new school buildings, start to do things like that.
So the Lake Louise.
Yep.
Classic. Okay, thank you, Mr. Fropples. Madam Clerk?
The clerk's report is in your red folder with the upcoming meeting schedule. Also attached to the clerk's report is Thursday's agenda. Starts at 10 a.m. in the morning for departmental budget presentations. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I'll find out tonight if I'm going to be there, or Deputy Mayor Bovee will take that. I have a possible tour group that day, but I'll know tonight. Let's take a look at the citizens' correspondence. Are there any comments on the correspondence being presented? Hearing and seeing none, they are presented. Madam Clerk, let's read the IMs.
IM 21056, reporting of conclusion of contract for bid number 21039B to Jim Pasenik Construction LLC for project number 75004 Talkeetna Dike Repair.
Any comments on the IM? Hearing none, IM is presented. There are no persons to be heard. We have reached public hearings. If you're present, please sign up to speak for each individual public hearing. If you have called into the meeting to testify, please hit *3. When you hear the public hearing you would like to speak to being read into the record, you'll be able to speak. Let's go to Madam Clerk. Let's do ordinance 21013, please.
An ordinance amending MSB 1773095 Domestic Wastewater System Plan Review. And if you're on the phone and would like to speak to this item, please press *3.
Okay, staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Manager, members of the Assembly, Alex Strawn, Planning Director. What this ordinance does is, well, first of all, I want to go back with a little bit of history of how we got here. And so in 2006, the borough adopted multifamily regulations, and it essentially applied to any parcel that had a certain amount of houses on it, given a certain threshold. And it created all sorts of requirements for like bike racks, and you have to screen your waste containers, and you have to have internal circulation and a certain amount of impervious surface. And it just basically set some standards for multifamily developments. In 2012, there was a modification done by the Assembly that reduced a lot of standards within that code. It modified the threshold at which a multifamily development permit was required. There was some back and forth and some amendments made over about a year of time, but ultimately they settled on six units per lot, where it was the threshold at which a multifamily development permit was required. And one of the things that was done in that 2012 ordinance was to remove the requirement for any sort of ADC review for installation of the septic system that was installed for that. And meanwhile, the state of Alaska regulations that regulate wastewater disposal had sort of a loophole in it that was discovered by certain developers. And that loophole was there was stricter standards for anything other than a single family home, which is what they called it. And so the interpretation of that was that you could have 4 single family homes on 1 acre lot, and you kind of have to put your blinders on and treat each one of those separately. A couple of the important things that were not required for single family homes was, first of all, it could be done under a certified septic installer, which is not an engineer. It's a person who takes a course and gets this certification. But if they were to cut corners and get caught, they risk the potential of losing their certification, but they're not putting their engineer's license on the line. The other important thing that was not required for single family homes, regardless of how many are in a lot, was the need for having an alternate place for soil absorption. If a septic system were to go out, or a leach field were to go out on say a triplex, you would need to have an alternate location for that leach field to go. Well, that was not the case because of this interpretation. And so we had a proliferation, and because of our change in our code, we had a proliferation of this type of development that had 4 septic systems, 4 tanks, 4 leach fields, 4 houses, all on 1 lot, and it takes up the entire 1 acre lot. So when those septic systems go out, and a lot of them were installed via certified septic installer, not an engineer, when they go out, they'll have to be replaced in place. And that can be very expensive, especially if you have no room on the lot to put the waste material that you dig up. You have to dig up all the contaminated soil, find a place to dispose of it, and then put new material down. I did talk with a person who's been doing dirt work here in a long time for the borough, who estimated it's probably around $30,000 generally, give or take, to do a replace in place. So times 4, over a 25-year period, that can be a pretty big expense. So in 2016, the state of Alaska did actually tighten up their code and get rid of that loophole. They changed it from single family home to what's called a private residence. And that basically means a 1 or 2 dwelling units per lot, which in 2018, we changed our threshold to 2 units per acre, basically, to match the state of Alaska. It's a threshold, so as you get larger in size, you're allowed more units without a multifamily development permit. So we also brought the, let's see here. We also added the requirement for an ADC plan review. And so everything was going on fine. People were doing multifamily developments. They'd go to DEC and they'd do a plan review. They'd get that from the DC and submit it to us as part of the checklist for this type of permit that we're reviewing. And then in 2019, the DEC issued an interim guidance document, which was essentially a memo saying that they are no longer going to require plan reviews for any conventional system less than 2,500 gallons per day, which is about a 10 unit development. So developers were stuck in this position where they wanted to get our permit, and one of the things that they needed was a stamp from the DEC saying that they submitted a plan with them, or had a plan reviewed by them and approved, and they couldn't get that because DEC was no longer reviewing those. So what this ordinance does, it's really not creating any new requirements. It It just says that if you're going to do a multifamily development, you have to have an engineer certify that the requirements of the DEC have been met and submit that as part of the application to the borough so that we can move on with our permit and get them issued.
Any questions? Otherwise, thank you. Great report. Appreciate it. I'll open the public hearing at this time. Oh, Mr. Sumner, excuse me.
I had a question. Through the mayor, doesn't it actually require that it be submitted up to 90 days after the installation and not along with the permit?
So yeah, there is a requirement for afterwards that it be submitted to the DEC, but we're trying to get, our requirement is that you have to have it submitted prior to developing. So before it was, they submit a plan review to the DEC, they get, approval that that plan is good to go. They submit it to us and they'd go develop and have, but yeah, they're still required to submit afterwards to the DEC, I believe.
So would that be part of the application process? Because in the ordinance, if I'm not mistaken, it actually says that within 90 days after installation, you shall submit to the Matsu Borough engineer stamped DEC compliant septic system.
Oh, yeah, that's correct. That was a change that was recommended by the Planning Commission because that's what the DEC requires. So yes, that is what is in here. So they could submit it after we issue the permit and after it's installed. Correct.
Good? Okay. Thank you. I'll open the public hearing at this time. Do we have a sign-up list? I don't believe we have a sign-up list on this. Anybody in the audience wish to speak to this ordinance? Mr. Haberman?
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in the Matsu Valley. And for your information, I've been living in the Matsu Valley for a few decades, for some time. Although 43 years, Alaska resident, that extent I live in the valley. I also attend these meetings. And on the subject before you, dealing with wastewater system, is the key words were the state's removal from the idea of approval and leaving it basically to the borough. But let me remind you also, I think it was last meeting, if not the meeting before you, the septic issue, because this is a septic issue with all due respect. You had plans to deal with the septic systems. And basically, it's been put as a halt and to deal with what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Where's it going to go? So because you saw in your idea of having a private government partnership in that overall issue, the end result is it didn't get going too well. And you're looking into Palmer, City of Palmer as maybe a possibility, but then they have problems with the feds and how they handle septic. So what concerns me is we are not dealing with this issue and we're saying something here and saying something over there, and we're not having a real concept of where we're going. But overall, where we've been going is we're not handling the septic issue appropriately. This is a large population in the valley, over 100,000 people. It's grown while I've been living here. And that septic issue has been put off in a way that has complicated situations, and septic is going to Anchorage. And there's back and forth issues and all that. I do not approve this thing because you need to deal with this a whole package of how the borough's going to handle it, both what the costs are and not a piecemeal scenario. And I am concerned, very much concerned, when the state walks away from the responsibility. I remind you on a sidebar issue, the borough does not have police powers. It's the state. Now, the state's coming and saying, we're not gonna work on this. It's you. And it's not really clear in this document exactly what the steps are and how is it gonna go through the borough for whoever is wanting to deal with something. And in closing, with 18 seconds to spare, this deals with contractors building homes and so forth. And on the assembly, you do have contractors. So you've got a conflict of interest of assembly members here that are going to deal with this issue, but it's business, it's not appropriate, and it should have been addressed before it went to public hearing. And that's Assembly Member Jesse Sumner for the record.
Okay, are there any telephonic? No telephonic. Anybody else in the audience wish to speak on this ordinance? Seeing and hearing none, I'll close the public hearing at this time. Ms. Bovee, could you move this?
I move to adopt ordinance 21-013.
Is there any discussion? Any objection to passing, Ms. Nowers?
I just had two questions. I don't think there is a conflict that was brought up. I mean, we have two builders, but this is to actually make things, equally restrictive. I don't see any advantage for our builders here, but because that was brought up, do we have any sort of conflict? It didn't appear so to me, and then I have another question.
Okay, any objection to this legislation passing?
Okay, we're not going to address that at
I
all.
didn't. We can't hear you.
I'm asking, we have two builders who would potentially be building multiplex facilities.
Oh.
But I didn't see it as any sort of conflict, but I'm
I don't.
asking because it brought up.
That's my job, and I don't
Okay.
view it as a conflict, so. Any objection to passing this legislation?
I do have one question,
Okay,
follow-up question. I don't have any objection to this legislation, but does staff know whether the DEC regulations that these facilities would have to comply with, do they now require an alternate location if a septic fails?
So for anything over a duplex, they do require an alternate location if it fails, since they tightened up the code.
Okay, thank you.
Fiat, did you have anything?
And I just wanted to add that it's apples and oranges. On one hand, we're talking about treatment. On one hand, we're talking about replacement. They have nothing to do with one another. Nothing.
Okay, anything else for the discussion? Any objection to passing ordinance 21013? Seeing no objection, hearing no objection, that ordinance passes. Madam Clerk, 21012 and resolution 21021.
An ordinance reappropriating $150,000 from the fiscal year 2021 Information Technology Department Operating Budget Fund 100 to the Human Resources Information System Project Number 203164204, Fund 480 for the procurement of a new Human Resources Information Management System. The accompanying resolution 21021, a resolution approving the scope of work and budget for the Human Resources Information Management System Project Number 203164204. And if you're on the phone and would like to speak to this item, press *3.
Staff report?
Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly, Eric Wyatt, Director of the Information Technology Department. We had $150,000 in my operating budget in this fiscal year to replace our current HR systems, and we've got multiple smaller systems. We want to get to one system that's more efficient. We put out an RFP. We did not get adequate responses on that RFP that would meet our needs. So we would like to move this money from operating into a project, because at this point, there's not enough time to get it done before the end of the fiscal year. So this would allow us a little bit more time to get this project done, and then we'll go back out to RFP and look at some more options. So that's what this is doing.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Wyatt. Appreciate it. I will open the public hearing at this time. Anybody in the audience wish to speak on this ordinance? Are there any telephonic? Nobody signed up, I don't believe. So we'll close the public hearing at this time. Ms. Bovee?
I move to adopt ordinance 21-022 and resolution 21-021.
Any discussion? Any objection to passing this ordinance? Hearing none, that ordinance and resolution passes. Madam Clerk, ordinance 21023.
An ordinance amending MSB 1804035A, Port Commission membership. And if you're on the phone and would like to speak to this item, press *3.
Staff report, Ms. Nolan.
Good evening, Assembly members and Mayor Halter. I'm Teresa Dolan, the Port Operations Manager. The mayor requested ordinance number 21-023 to be drafted for consideration by the Assembly. This ordinance was a change to code regarding the actual composition of the Port Commission, effectively reserving one seat out of the 7 on the commission for an Assembly member. The Port Commission did not provide any input. There was a special Port Commission meeting scheduled on March 22nd to discuss the ordinance, but the commission did not have a quorum present. A second special meeting was scheduled for April 5th. The meeting began. One commissioner objected and left the meeting. This left the Port Commission without a quorum, and the meeting was adjourned with no action taken.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Dolan? And she is correct. I requested this ordinance to add a Assembly member, much like the Fish Commission. So, Mr. Sumner?
Approximately how often do you guys not have quorum for the port meetings?
This is probably the 3rd time this year. Well, over the last 12 months.
And there was actually, if I'm correct, there was actually a quorum at this last meeting, and then one of the members left and produced.
That is correct.
So, okay. I'll open a public hearing at this time. Anybody in the audience wish to speak to us? I guess we don't have a sign-up list, I don't believe. Mr. Haberman, go ahead, please.
Can this party next to me be social distance from me respectfully, a few feet back?
Okay, she's moving.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in the Matsu Valley. I follow the public process. When the public process done appropriately, a decision made by the governing body is more likely in the public interest. One of the meetings I attend on a regular basis for a number of years has been the Port Commission. And let's go on to the document specifically that's before you now. It's a call to have Assembly members to be appointed on the commission itself. I strongly opposed. In fact, I strongly opposed any Assembly member being on any boards and commissions. Why? Because basically these items, these are advisory boards or planning commission and so forth. You don't see Assembly members on that one, do you? The fact is you've got a conflict of interest scenario. It's an opportunity for Assembly members to participate in a way to tell the other commission members, okay, this is what we should do. The fact is, it also creates a scenario where there's a bias situation. And what I mean by bias is when those items go before the Assembly as a whole from different boards and commissions, the end result is there was a prejudice occurring because a member of the Assembly has been on a particular board and commission. So number one, I strongly oppose on this. Second is, in reference to the meeting yesterday, there's a place for public comment. Unfortunately, there was no opportunity. The party who, with no explanation by the part staff here, didn't explain exactly what's going on. They strongly opposed the way the thing was set up. There was no resolution. And then the words coming from the staff who just spoke before me, it's not my job, quote, end quote, and my boss told me. So there was no resolution for them to see. It was a document that you would see, but when you go to Planning Commission, you'll see documents, both a resolution of the Planning Commission and an item that's going before the Assembly as a proposed ordinance. So the end result is nothing happened there. And I couldn't speak. Yeah, I couldn't say a word because They didn't even tell the person, oh, public comment. And he just walked off from the microphone, meaning it was a team meeting, and the end result is there was no chance. But in closing, with 25 seconds to spare, I call for the port idea, the concept of it, any future concept dealing with the port to end now. We've gotten a false narrative of what was supposed to be done and what should be done in building the port. All we've had is more expense and more abuse of spending money in a way that we cannot handle it at this time or any other time. And I support, in closing, the focus on the Port of Alaska and Anchorage and not money coming from this port. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on this ordinance? Are there any, Mr. Smolden?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Todd Smolden, Matsu, resident. I just wanted to let you know that I attended the Port Commission meeting telephonically yesterday. I thought a member of your staff did a fine job of explaining what her role is with the port. And also, I just wanted to let you know that without a quorum, the meeting did not reach the point of public comment. So public comment would not have been appropriate at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smolden. Are there any telephonics? Anybody else in the audience wish to speak on this issue? Okay, I'll close the public hearing at this time. Ms. Bovee, please.
I move to adopt ordinance 21-023.
Comments, discussion? Mr. Hale?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say, I think this is probably a pretty good idea to have a assembly person on the Port Commission, as long as it's not me.
Okay, well, my intention was to appoint Mr. Yount, so that saves you, Mr. Hale. But I did ask for this. It's still a seven-member Port Commission. I always appreciated the fact that the Fish Commission had 2 assembly members on it. It was very effective in the work back and forth with Assembly. There seemed to be better communication, and that was my hopes here. And I hope I didn't offend any of the Port Commissioners at all in any manner by doing this, but my intent was to add Mr. Yount, a freshman, new Assembly person, and that's pretty much it for this ordinance. So anybody else want to weigh in or any objection to passing this? If not, seeing no objection, this ordinance passes, and I appoint Mr. Yount, our Assembly person, to this position.
Mr. Mayor, just to be clear, it will come forward at the next assembly meeting on the vacancy report.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, ordinance 21026.
An ordinance approving a sale to adjacent property owners of the substandard tax foreclosed properties that have been held by the borough for over 10 years, in which repurchase rights of former record owners.
Okay, let's do our staff report. Ms. Cameron?
Good evening, everybody up at the DS. Pretty straightforward. These are properties that we received. Some of them date back to 1976, which was the year I graduated from high school. So counting back, that's a time. Anyway, we've had these properties for at least for many over 30 years. All the property rights have been extinguished by former record owners. The idea is to take these substandard lots that are typically 1/4 to 3/4 in size, can't develop them singularly, offer them to the adjacent property owners, and that means anybody that's right next door, front or back, or on the corners. And if they'd like to buy those, then we're going to offer them for the cash, for the assessed value at this time. If, in a glorious world, we sold all of these properties, which probably won't happen, but if we did, we're looking at a value of over $88,000. There are several properties that I know will sell because we have been contacted for years and years by the adjacent owners. They're interested in them. Maybe we'll have some competitives. Maybe we'll get 10 grand. I don't know, but I just want to be able to offer them to the property owners. And if you have any other questions, I'm here.
Any other questions? Ms. Nowers?
Thank you. Through the mayor, I think it's a great idea. Are there other substandard properties that we hold that we've been holding for over 10 years?
No, through the chair to Ms. Norris, these are properties that, well, let me take that back. I'm sure there's substandard properties out there that the borough doesn't control. Some of those we may have retained for public purpose. There's no public purpose needed properties. And this is on the tax foreclosed list of substandards that I've included all of them that I can, with the exception of a few that have some litigation issues that we're just kind of not going to deal with right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
1976, it's quite a while ago, isn't it? You're making me feel old as a junior in law school. Okay. I'll close the public hearing at this time. Like I said, I'll open at this time. Anybody signed up? Sir, come on forward.
Good evening. It's my first time being in this building. I appreciate the opportunity. What I would like to.
Can you just state your name for the
Oh,
record?
yeah.